the story of the house, of course, is related to the story of the fort because it's the same family. Only here, the Indian troubles are long gone by the time of the story of the house. The Pricketts are still here. Before the house is built, they're still living in the 1772 built log cabin and farming and so on and so forth. Only now it's almost 100 years after the first generation of Pricketts settled on this land, and one of the 421 great-grandchildren is here farming and living in that house, and decides one day that it's had it. And he's going to build a new brick house, and that's that. So in the spring of 1858, our man Job, again, farmer, dedicated farmer, prosperous farmer, but not a rich man, starts making bricks on the farm from the clay of the farm, firing them here, and building this house with his two hands. That was in 1858, finished enough to move into by his wife's declaration in 1861. Do understand that your bricks aren't being brought in, they're being made here on the farm and even fired here on the farm. All the walls in the house are solid brick. There's no wood frame to this house. The main wing walls are thicker than the kitchen wing behind me here because it supports a full second story, and so the walls there are thicker. Job's first wife, Louisa, died in 1865. There were 6 children of that union. The next year, our man Job, who I consider a very handsome man, there's a couple of pictures of him up there in the gallery, and I think he was a pretty darn good-looking feller, hardworking, intelligent, and so on. Well, the next year, our man Job, the handsome, those are my words, understand, nobody else says that, I do. He marries a young widow, 14 years his junior, with 3 little children. Now, did you catch that age difference there? Okay, that's pretty important. Well, her name's Rebecca, and out to the farm she comes. Now, she comes for money, too. So her coming out here to be a farmer's wife was a social step down, let me tell you. So it had to be love. Now, did you catch the children number there? You got 6 from Louisa. Rebecca brings 3 more, and that parent love between the 2 of them must have been very busy because they made 5 more children. Now, if you did your math on that, that's 14. Now, before you start picture this house looking like a daycare center, understand that there's a huge age difference. Now, remember the age difference on the 2 brides, okay? So Louisa's children are headed out the door to adulthood as Rebecca's 5 new babies start to come. So I sat down with the dates one year, who was born when and got married when, and I figured 8 still living under this roof at the same time, maximum. That'd be the tops. Well, the last one born was Nellie. Now, Miss Nellie, to me, is very, very important to this whole site. She was born in 1877. Now, when Job starts to build this house, it's no longer Wild West days, let me tell you. The Civil War is on the horizon. Queen Victoria is on the throne in England. Oh my, what an influence that woman had. There's roads everywhere. There's trains. There's river traffic to some degree. But even when Nellie comes in 1877, by the way, Job was 58 when she was born. That's pretty impressive too, don't you think? Well, when she was born, 1877, it's even more modern with cities and towns of it, but it's still horse and buggy days. You just have to agree with me on that. Well, Miss Nellie grew up, 1877 now, keep that in the back of your mind. Miss Nellie grew up, led a typical life. She got married and had children and blah, blah, blah. And the next thing you know, she's sitting in front of somebody's television watching Neil Armstrong put that first boot on the moon and lived on. By the time she passed away, it was 1981. Do you remember her birth year? And Miss Nellie, at her passing, was 2 weeks short of 104. Yes, yes, yes. They said her mind was sharp right up until the end. Well, think of all the things Miss Nellie saw in her lifetime. That included the building of the memorial fort. and this part of her family's farm becoming a state park, and so on and so forth. Well, during that time, you see, there was some pretty serious interest in the Monongahela being used for coal and lumber barge traffic. And to do that better with the new ones, they had to improve the locks and the dam system and so on and so forth. Well, when the Army Corps of Engineers, and you have to agree that's the feds, when they got done with the project, there were some new 100-year floodplains, of course. Well, those had to be bought out at market value. The families living on them moved out, and there's no discussion. That's federal law. Well, this part of the Prickett farm fell into that category at that time, and so the feds took over. No more Pricketts living on this part of the farm. Now, there are descendants living on the other side of the ridge over there, a couple 100 acres over that away. So the feds had no plans for the land here, so they start to remove the buildings. They bulldozed and burned the standing wooden farm buildings, and they were going to bulldoze his house into his basement, just let the land do what it wanted to do after that. Well, can you picture the history lovers, not only descendants but others, who thought this was just awful, and Marion County Historical Society get together. They must have had a spy, because they found out when the bulldozer was scheduled to come to start the dastardly deed on this house. Well, they gathered out here, and Irene Prickett stood right there. Now, Nellie was her great aunt, if you can picture this relationship. And she told that man on the bulldozer nobody was tearing her family's house down today, and she refused to move. Don't you just love it? Now, I don't know if Nellie was out here that day. I would love to know. She was still quite alive and quite healthy and quite active at that time. Well, that was a stay of execution. Okay, so the house was saved for a while. Well, the Marion County folks talks it over with the state of West Virginia, who talks it over with the feds, who said, "Oh, you've been wanting to make a historic state park out there, have you? Well, yes. Okay, we'll rent it to you." And so to this day, this land here is leased by the state of West Virginia for this sweet little park, all 188 acres of it, so beautifully cared for by the state fellas, and we don't belong to either one of them. Pricketts Fort Memorial Foundation is who did the memorial for it, and that's who we work for. And at this point, I usually thank